In your battle to slay the Grey, your brush is your weapon, and like any great warrior, you must first learn to wield it. On a more serious note, the ability to control your brush is paramount to your ability to paint. What is good brush control, and what skills do you need to wield your sword in battle? To start, it's the ability to envision where, how, etc. you want to apply your paint to the model, and then being able to execute it. Maybe this is freehand, maybe it's eyes, maybe it's just plain layering. No matter what, not everyone can do with more and better brush control. I'm going over everything you need to know on this Pride Night from Westfalia, the sponsor of this week's video. How to hold your brush. First of all, I hold my brush strangely. At least that's what you all tell me. I hold my paintbrush like I hold my pencil, which I apparently also hold strangely. But what you need is a comfortable grip on your brush. As for wear, I tend to place my fingers closer to the tip of the brush, where my first finger is just at or beyond the ferrule. Holding your brush further back will cause your movement to become exaggerated and more difficult to control. Holding your brush too close to the tip can cause muscle cramps. As for the grip, I hold mine, again, like a pencil. Steady enough to direct the tip where I want it, but not so hard that it doesn't react to the surfaces I'm applying the tip to. How to sit. I lean forward and rest my forearms on the edge of my desk, though resting your elbows on the desk is also an option. I then rest my wrist against my grip, and if need be, hand on the arm. I use a hobby holder from Game Envy, and I absolutely love this thing. If for some reason leaning my hand on the arm is not an option, or perhaps even putting the model on the grip isn't an option, I wear gloves or wrap my model in plastic wrap. The oils from your skin can smudge away paint, so I'm very attentive to how and where I touch the model before I get the chance to seal it. Painting. Acquiring the correct consistency of your paint is extremely important, and the necessary steps to get it that way vary from technique to technique and brand to brand. For that reason, I highly recommend experimenting with your own tools and preferences. But basically, we want the paint to flow off the brush at the lightest of touches. Personally, I dip my brush in paint water, wring out about 3/4 of the water on a paper towel, then fill my brush halfway with my thinned paint. Next, test it on the back of your hand. If you have a hard time getting the paint off the brush, or it leaves what I like to call snow drifts on either side, then your paint is too thick. If your paint blobs off and puddles, your brush is too heavily filled with water, or your paint could be too thinned, and still your brush is overloaded. Let's talk about how to use your brush in battle. For base coating, layering, and glazing medium to large surfaces, I use the front half of my brush. What I mean is that I'm not just painting with the tip, but I'm pressing down the full first half of the brush onto my surface. Using the belly of your brush ensures that your paint is spread out evenly across your surface. For smaller areas, I use the front 1/4 of the brush and slowly work along the surface, making appropriately sized strokes. I find that making shorter strokes like this allows me to have better control of the amount of paint applied to the model, instead of painting continuously with a single stroke that can lead to uneven application. When you are painting a small or detailed area, you can either use the tip of your larger brush or a smaller brush. The tip of a Winsor Newton size 1 is so good you certainly can do everything you need with a brush that size. But personally, I prefer working with the 00 from Winsor Newton for tiny details on the face. When it comes to these smaller details, thinning your paint and loading your brush appropriately is even more important, especially if you are using a smaller brush. Since the brush holds less paint, your thinning and loading needs to be exact. I recommend the dot test, which is basically making a tiny dot on your hand, like painting on the iris or pupil of your model. If you can't get a perfect dot with the softest of touches, load your brush or thin your paint again. If you have to push to get the paint off your brush, you're more likely to mess it up. Like we talked about before, if it completely just blobs off your brush onto your surface, then it's too wet. When doing the dot test, be aware that you might only get 1 or 2 good dots off your brush. That's okay, just load it up and do it again. Beyond the postures that I suggested earlier, another way that you can help steady your hand when painting is to press your wrists together, and I frequently balance my elbow on my knee. Again, this is all about stability. I'm also conscious of my breathing and frequently hold my breath when painting those extra fine details. If the ability to paint those tiny details still eludes you, don't give up yet. There are still a few more tricks you can try. Consider if there's an easier way to paint whatever you're trying to achieve. For example, when painting eyes, I paint the entire eye area white, then apply my pupil, then line around the eye with a very deep red. This is far easier for me than basing the whole thing in dark red and then placing the perfect white area for the rest of my eyes. In general, think about the parts you are having difficulty with and consider if there are ways you can make painting easier. Reordering your painting process, flipping your model upside down, or whatever else you might need to get the job done. You should not see any mistake as a failing. You can always go back and paint over it, or if need be, strip and start again. If you're having trouble covering your mistakes, add in white to your color to give it more coverage to help you make a clean start. Let's take a moment to talk about this week's sponsor, Westfalia Miniatures. Westfalia has been creating miniatures for 10 years, and they specialize in gorgeous classical fantasy models, as well as pop culture references with a fantasy twist. Their models are hand-sculpted, and you can get behind-the-scenes photos, vote in polls, and more on their Patreon, Boris's Cabinet of Curiosities. What I love about Westfalia is that their miniatures come in all shapes and sizes. I am especially in love with their Pride Knights, which is a group of all-women adventurers dressed in reasonable and realistic clothing and gear. If you are looking at interesting models and are having a hard time finding what you're looking for, or just realistic humans, I highly recommend giving Westfalia a look. You can check out Westfalia in my description box below. Thank you so much, Westfalia, for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to painting. Wet blending. Wet blending is a technique that I hear a lot of frustration about, but luckily, the way to grade blends is through how you use your brush. The secret is simple. We are going to use the side or belly of our brush and brush in the same direction of our gradient. Brushing against our gradient could give it a strange ripple, so to achieve the smoothest blends, you want to paint with the gradient. This goes even if you are painting a small area or using a small brush. Use as much of the belly as you can get away with depending on the surface you are working on. Lining. When doing lining, I don't recommend using a typical round brush. In my experience, the belly of the brush can get in the way and knock into other parts of your miniature. Instead, I recommend using a lining brush, which is a long and thin brush with a fine point. The brush I use for lining is from Redgrass Games, though I do frequently use my 00 from Winsor Newton as well. And again, we want to make sure that paint consistency is exactly where we want it. Edge highlighting. Edge highlighting is the technique of using the side of your brush to only catch the raised edges of an area. When doing edge highlighting, you typically want to use a thicker paint. What I typically do is load up my brush with my paint, rub the majority of it off on a paper towel, and then delicately, using again the side and belly of my brush, do several gentle passes across the raised edges. The harder you push, the deeper into those crevices your brush will go. So if you only want to hit the extra raised edges, you want to use a very light touch. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and thank you to Westfalia for sponsoring this video. If you like what I do here, you know the drill. Like, subscribe, comment, join me over on Patreon. I have an amazing community. I'm also doing a special patron-only Halloween mini critique. Basically, be a patron of mine, paint something spooky or Halloween themed, send it in by October 31st, and I'm going to make a Patreon-only video critiquing everyone's models. Otherwise, I have merchandise. You can buy anything through the Amazon affiliate links down in the description box below, and I'll make a little bit of money. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll see you next time.